Are you familiar with the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act? If you live in Canada and are against human trafficking, you should be. And beside me, I have an expert in advocacy against human trafficking that says if that act gets repealed, our children may be up for sale. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News at Lonsdale Quay, standing with Kathy Peters from the Be Amazing campaign. Now, Kathy is a heavy hitter when it comes to taking a stand against human trafficking in Canada, as well as British Columbia. She's received multiple awards, including one from the Queen herself for the work that you do. So thank you for being here at Rebel News today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for those who are just tuning in, many people I know, many Rebel News subscribers are in support of ending human trafficking and the risks that poses for children. In fact, one of my second most popular report was one on fighting human trafficking. So this issue is really going to resonate with the people watching here. Tell us about the Protection of Communities and Exploited Peoples Act and why it's currently under attack.
Okay, that's a great question. First of all, I want to explain the law. There's 4 parts to it, and I would call it a very progressive law in the world. Part number 1 is that the law criminalizes the buyers of sex. The Johns, the traffickers, the facilitators, they are criminalized. Part number 2 is that the sellers of sex are immune from prosecution. They are not charged. Part number 3 is there's supposed to be exit strategies put in place so to help the sellers get out of the sex trade. And part number 4 is there's supposed to be an prevention education program so that youth, children, and the vulnerable don't get pulled into the sex industry in the first place. It is the fastest growing crime in the world, in Canada, and very much here in Vancouver and Surrey. As a matter of fact, Vancouver and Surrey are considered Canada's pimp playground. We've got a big problem, and Canadians generally are not aware, especially here in British Columbia.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the act in the sense of what's happening right now when I say it's under attack. Now, the legacy media is covering what's happening in court over the next few days here, but they're referring it to as sort of an act that is harming sex workers, of course, also known as prostitution. So what is that about?
Okay, so they're having a court case right now in Ontario. It's being heavily covered for the next few days. And then the hope is, I think, that they want to take it to the Supreme Court of Canada with the goal of fully decriminalizing prostitution for the entire country, for all of Canada. Now, I want to explain the seriousness of that. We have the longest border in the world with the United States. We would become America's brothel overnight. We would become like Germany, the Netherlands, Thailand, Nevada, New Zealand. They have all fully decriminalized prostitution. And what does that mean? That means child sex trafficking takes off. Organized crime is typically involved. Violence increase. International crime syndicates are involved. It's a very lucrative crime. And typically gangs will use it as a fundraiser. So that's a problem we have. And just so everybody knows, we have a gang problem right now in Vancouver and British Columbia. We are not addressing the gang problem. The gang problem is increasing, and the big way that they raise funds is by human trafficking. They are targeting young girls and some boys, younger and younger ages. We say 13 to 14 years of age is the age to get into this, but now in Vancouver, Surrey, Vancouver Island, we're talking tweens. We're talking ages 10, 11, and 12. This is grade 4, starting that young. With the indigenous girls, it's even younger. They are very vulnerable, and they are being targeted aggressively by the sex industry. The sex industry is very powerful, particularly in Vancouver and Victoria in the country.
I support sex workers' rights because everyone's entitled to human rights and benefits. Women are entitled to take charge of their own lives, and it's just the right thing to do.
They are the ones that are aggressively putting pressure on Ottawa to fully decriminalize this law, which again, I want to stress to the Canadian public, we cannot lose. First casualties would be our Indigenous women and girls. No Canadian would support that.
So how is British Columbia, if we have such a prevalent problem with this, how is it comparing against other provinces when it comes to taking a stand against human trafficking?
Well, first of all, I want to say that domestic violence, sexual crimes are really on the increase, and Stats Canada has come up with that. In terms of provinces, BC is by far the furthest behind in the entire country. So, for example, I just found this in the news. Alberta is now committing $20 million to fight human trafficking. So the famous country singer Paul Brandt has really spearheaded that. He's been put in charge of a task force to stop human trafficking. So BC is the best place in all of Canada to buy and sell women and children and the vulnerable for sex in the entire country. Ontario is best practices globally. They are really addressing it, and they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into stopping it. Manitoba has Joy Smith. She was the MP that introduced our human trafficking laws. They are decades ahead of us, and now we've got Alberta. So BC is well behind. BC, I call it the West Coast phenomena. We are very similar to Washington State, Oregon, and California. That's where we have the similarities.
Now, I'm going to let you guys know how you can take action. You have a petition up at your beamazingcampaign.org. But let's end on letting maybe parents or other citizens know what are some of the signs that they could see if maybe young people are getting caught up in this.
Okay, so we want to look for human trafficking indicators, and I encourage everybody to go to my website because I do have a whole handout on that. But the kind of thing that you look for is the girl or your daughter or a young woman that you know starts to distance themselves from their family and friends. Their grades start to drop. Their clothing starts to dramatically change. Maybe their nails are done, more provocative clothing. Oh, there's a boyfriend now in the picture, an older boyfriend. You may or may not meet him. Gold chains are really popular, but the really popular thing now is tattoos. So if you see a tattoo of diamond or a crown or initials, if that's common for pimps to brand their property, their victims. And again, these girls don't know that they are being pimped out. They just think this is a boyfriend, might be a lousy boyfriend, but this is their boyfriend. So tattoos are very common, but really withdrawing, you see a change. They're exhausted, their grades are dropping. You just have a gut feeling that something's off.
We certainly live in a digital age. Tell us how, if any way, the digital era is affecting prostitution of children.
Well, hugely, absolutely. That's a game changer. So I always say there's 4 factors that are causing human trafficking. It's globalization, unregulated technology, limited law enforcement, and very little prevention education. So let's go back to unregulated technology. We're talking social media here. And our youth, our young people are on social media. The big ones are Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. And there's just so much, literally prostitution happening online. Sextortion, cyberbullying. We even talk about cyber sex terrorism now. It doesn't take much for a girl to be asked to share a nude, and then it's shared. And then we're into all kinds of criminal activity. This is becoming normalized with our young people and with our young, very young girls. They think it's a cool thing to do. They think nothing of it. Sexting, I think, is the term, and very common. And they supposedly think they make money at this, but they're asked to do it all the time. So this is where our youth, our young girls are very vulnerable, and where I need parents to be aware.
Now, could you touch a little bit on explaining what you mean by globalization also contributing to this?
What I mean by that is it's a global phenomenon now. Human sex trafficking is global. So we have a lot of immigrants traveling all over the world. They like to come to Canada, for example. So they are, along with the indigenous, are particularly vulnerable. Sex traffickers know who to look for. They're looking for the vulnerable. So that's immigrants, that's LGBTQ, that's any youth in foster care. They just know how to look for vulnerability. That is the key, vulnerability.
Well, I know that you and others working with you to help fight human trafficking have been meeting with MPs to get this story out as well. And we'll go ahead and link how you can take action on that petition in the written article for this report below in the description box. Is there any last words you wanted to say to the people watching this report?
Super simple. You want to learn about the issue, you want to share about it with your family and friends, and then you want to alert people in power. That's your law enforcement, and then your local politicians. That's your mayor, city council, your MLA, your MP. Tell them this is an issue, you want it dealt with.
Well, there you have it. Drea Humphrey for Rebel News and Kathy Peters. If you agree that our children are not for sale, take the easy step of sharing this report to as many people as you can. And I will continue to bring you more reports on this important topic. And if you want to be the first to stay in the know, you can become a Rebel News Plus subscriber at rebelnewsplus.com. We appreciate your support.